Welcome everybody. My name is Rachel Lee. Thank you so much for joining me for my lupus journey for Lupus Equals Lift Up, Persevere, Use Strength. What I plan to do is just briefly go through what lupus is, particularly for those who may have missed Andrew's session last week. And then I'll move into the way I've structured my book, which is into 3 sections. And the first section is where I'll spend the most time, which is where I talk about how symptoms of lupus manifested, the process and complexities of diagnosis, and then I'll move into the remaining 2 sections of my book. But hopefully what I've tried to compile is nice and clear. And again, please let me know at the end if there's anything that I haven't covered that you'd like to know more about. But basically what I've put up on the screen is to show the signature butterfly rash for those who may not know. Not all lupus sufferers have the rash, but it is a key symptom and has become the emblem of what is known as the purple butterfly to represent the lupus cause. And I've just put a photo of myself next to this young girl during a time where I was on a lot of cortisone, a lot of steroids, and my rash was quite prominent. So I'm not sure, I hope that is able to come through. And I put that photo on the back of my book as well to draw attention to the rash for lupus. So a little bit about myself, and my cat Squeaky might join us. Here she is. I've worked as a secondary teacher for nearly 20 years, and I taught predominantly in senior classes in year 11 and 12. And in Victoria, Australia, we have a program called VCE, which is the senior years. So I taught predominantly in health and human development, which looked at the human body, and we examined a lot of global health issues, particularly in the developing world, and a real passion for me and one of great joy. And I also taught food technology as well, so lots of nutrition and lots of cooking with the kids. All throughout junior to senior levels. I was diagnosed with lupus aged 16 in 1991, but I was symptomatic at 14 and possibly earlier. And I also have been a lupus warrior for the past 33 years. I've also, during that time, developed fibromyalgia in 2013, and I've had secondary Sjogren syndrome and Raynaud's phenomenon throughout the duration of my lupus diagnosis. And the last few years has been a suspicion of maybe a thyroid disease, where I've had some nodules that have been a bit suspicious that they need to keep an eye on. A little bit about lupus, just briefly. It is known medically as systemic lupus erythematosus, or SLE, and it develops when the body is allergic to itself. I might just move this up here so I can see what I'm writing, if that's okay. Develops when the body becomes allergic to itself. And in lupus, the body basically overreacts to an unknown stimulus and starts to make too many antibodies or proteins, and these then become directed at the body tissue, causing a lot of inflammation. And it's a chronic autoimmune disease. And just for unknown reasons, can cause the body to attack any part of the body's own tissue and its organs. And these predominantly include the joints, kidneys, the heart, lungs, brain, blood, or skin. I've got a couple of slides here that just bring up just a few important and interesting facts. Sadly, lupus can be fatal, particularly when it advances to organs such as the heart and kidneys. And this can really be of great distress, particularly if lupus has been undiagnosed for many, many years. and treatment has not been able to slow down the disease. Lupus appears to be rarer in men, occurring at a rate of approximately 1 man for every 9 women. And amazingly, lupus is more common than leukemia, multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, and cystic fibrosis combined. As of yet, there is no cure for lupus. In terms of causing factors, genetics and possible environmental factors could be causes. So lupus often appears for people under a time of great stress. Smoking could be a cause, UV exposure, hormonal changes, and illness are often other possible triggers, but nothing is set in concrete that's universal for everybody. And lupus can often coexist with other connected tissue conditions, such as fibromyalgia, seronegative rheumatoid arthritis, and Sjogren's syndrome. The average length of time is very distressing in terms of diagnosing lupus. 6 years has been determined as the average. So diagnostic testing needs to be much more swift, particularly in attacking the disease as soon as symptoms appear to reduce the significant impact of possible organ damage and to increase a really healthy prognosis of life. And that's one thing I'm sure other lupus sufferers are hopeful can be addressed. There's not one single test that will determine lupus, which is challenging as well. It's rare in children, but when it does occur, it's likely to be more serious. There are 3 major types of lupus, so SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus, discoid lupus, which is predominantly rashes in the body, particularly in the face, and lots of scarring as well. And people can even experience a drug-induced SLE, which mimics SLE. It's estimated that 5 million people worldwide suffer from lupus. And of those affected, 90% are women aged between 15 to 45. And of those, 2/3 are people of colour. And lupus can be dormant in the body for as many as 20 years before it can become active, which is quite extraordinary. And just finally there, as I mentioned earlier, that purple is the colour that represents lupus warriors throughout the world. Just briefly, the majority of symptoms that are shared amongst sufferers include extreme fatigue, so tiredness and no energy, headaches, painful or swollen joints, fever, anemia is common, swelling or edema in the feet, the legs, the hands, or even around the eyes, pain in the chest on deep breathing in the form of pleurisy. Also, the butterfly-shaped rash, which appears predominantly across the facial cheeks and nose, and sometimes even the forehead. Sun or light sensitivity or photosensitivity, hair loss, abnormal blood clotting, fingers turning white or red or blue when cold, known as Raynaud's phenomenon. And I know some of the RA patients that are attending today are familiar with that condition. And also mouth and nose ulcers are very common as well. And finally, just how is lupus treated? Very similar group of drugs that have been around for many, many years, very similar to the treatments used for rheumatoid arthritis and even other conditions like Crohn's disease. So some people with lupus might need non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications as pain relief, but the majority will need access to what are known as DMARDs, which are these disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, and they're classified as corticosteroids. So prednisolone prednisone would be the steroid used. Antimalarials that we've heard more about due to the COVID pandemic in the form of hydroxychloroquine, but most of us have known it as Plaquenil for years. I know I did. I only really learnt how to say that full name due to the pandemic. So there's a silver lining. And finally, they're immunosuppressants such as methotrexate, which is also commonly used in rheumatoid arthritis as well. Aspirin might be used as a form of an anticoagulant. And recently, the breakthrough of the use of biologics. So Benlysta was the first biologic to be specifically developed for lupus in over 60 years. And we're experiencing another breakthrough with a drug from AstraZeneca called anifrolumab, which is the second biologic that is specifically targeting lupus. So hopefully that will be accepted in Australia and other developed countries as another treatment for lupus. The prognosis for lupus patients in general, it's advised that with plenty of rest, a reduction in stress, a nutritious diet, regular exercise where possible, and the really important one is being really consistent in taking medication. It's hoped that at least 80 to 90% of people with lupus can expect to live a normal lifespan. Okay, so that's my introduction and in terms of briefly describing lupus for you. I want to move into my story for you now and start by showing you the cover of my book, which is called Lift Up, Persevere, Use Strength. I wanted to use this title to create something positive out of a really devastating disease. So using the letters of lupus to create some positivity. And it was a little saying I'd constructed about 20 years ago that would just sit up on my desk and I would just look at it and try and remind myself to just keep thinking positively. And so it was a really fitting title for me for my story. I also wanted to make sure I could come up with a cover that people would be intrigued by. And not being a celebrity or a famous person, I thought the best way would be an illustration of my face and more importantly, the symbol of the purple butterfly to signify the lupus cause. And an amazing Australian artist by the name of James Fosdyke was available to come up with this creation. He does a lot of work for an Australian comedian called Will Anderson and does all of his performance backdrops and podcasting illustrations and does a few internationally for other comedians. And I was really struck by the amazing work he does and was thrilled that he was available to do this for me. And I originally wanted to have a butterfly on my cheeks, and he came up with an even better idea, which was to create different purple butterflies to circle my face. And I really hope that when people see the cover of this book, that intrigues them in itself in terms of being curious and wanting to know more about the lupus cause. So why have I written a book? A few reasons. Before I stopped teaching, I was really struggling to feel connected in the world, particularly with an illness that not many people knew of and that was invisible. And really frustrating as well, as I'm sure many of you know, that, when you're told that you look well, even after you've explained how unwell you have been, that feeling of not really being understood and being judged is really challenging. So I felt a bit frustrated by that, and the lack of lupus awareness in general, that having this disease for 33 years, I haven't seen much change in the community in regard to people just knowing what it is when I mention it. And it's still taking way too long to diagnose. So diagnostic measures and greater awareness, particularly within our general practitioner community, so that they can recognise symptoms of fatigue, and achiness and not dismiss those, particularly for women who are often dismissed, told that it's just a virus, or, you might be premenopausal or you're a bit stressed. So really taking on board the seriousness of how people are feeling and getting that diagnosis done faster. And I wanted to also make a difference in creating something positive after a difficult time. And I hoped that after 33 years of having lupus, that my story would offer some comfort and solidarity to other lupus warriors, and also to create wider education for those who don't know much about it. So the way I've constructed my book is in 3 parts, and I've used each section of the title to focus on a specific area. So part 1 is all about lifting up during the diagnosis period, and also focusing on the support system, particularly of my family. So in regard to my experience with lupus, the first symptom I had was just a very small chilblain on my small pinky finger. And 1 chilblain became 2, and so forth. And they were soon all over my hands, and my hands had become incredibly ice cold. And then a chronic pain started to set in. So I was around age 13 to 14. So I wore gloves, full-fingered and fingerless at school, and I'd use little tubey foams and cut them up and put them on each of my fingers to cushion all of the swelling, so I could write and hold a pen, which was very challenging. Apart from those initial symptoms, months later, I started to experience a bit more stress and was really teary coming home from school, not really coping with just a regular day at school. And not long after that, I started to feel really tired and fatigued, a lot of achy, weak muscle feelings, and sleeping after a day at school, which soon led to not going to school, where I had difficulty walking, I had no energy, pain in my feet, in my joints, and a little bit of fever. And not long after those symptoms appeared, I started to have some extreme weight loss. So as a result, I missed the final term of year 8. And during that time, I had all of the pathology done, and everything indicated that there was nothing wrong, that I was completely healthy. So I was then referred to a child paediatrician / psychiatrist, as I had lost so much weight, and it was suspected that maybe I had an eating disorder. And this was probably the most challenging time for me, because I did not have an eating disorder, and was challenged and grilled quite rigorously, in the hope that the psychiatrist would reveal one as the cause for my dramatic weight loss. And I felt very, very powerless, very distressed, and felt very much that my age and my gender as a female were very much guiding that invasive line of questioning. So that was a really challenging time. And I also felt frustrated, as I had these symptoms of red, swollen hands. So they were plaguing the psychiatrist. He couldn't quite understand what was causing that. So he felt there was something hidden mentally in regard to my weight loss. So he wanted to continue treating me there, but referred me to the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne to see a professor of paediatric rheumatology, because of these swollen hands. And the professor felt that my symptoms of fatigue and exhaustion were simply that of a virus. And amazingly, he could not explain what was happening with my hands. He then referred me to see an adult rheumatologist, who treated me for another year. And he too could not diagnose my ailments. The blood work continued to appear fine, no inflammation markers. And even though now, clearly to me, and I'm sure to you, those are very significant symptoms of Raynaud's phenomenon, he did not diagnose me with that condition, but actually constructed this term from out of the sky called acute vascular instability syndrome, to explain what was happening with my hands. And I remember very vividly during one consultation where he just said to me, "You are not as sick as you think you are." And I've never forgotten that, because I walked out feeling more powerless than ever and more flat than ever, in terms of feeling the absolute opposite and feeling so lost and misunderstood. And obviously my parents also. Amazingly, I returned to school in 1990 after that term off. I still had a lot of pain in my hands, and I still had fatigue and low energy, but I was able to get through school, and I only took an NSAID called Voltaren, which didn't really help, but that was the only treatment I was receiving, and I just had to take it easy. But the beginning of 1991, which was a couple of weeks into year 10, I just was struck down with the return of those debilitating symptoms of fatigue, and I just could not lift my body out of bed. I was just completely void of any energy or strength. I struggled to walk, and I needed to use a walking stick. I'd sleep all day. I lost even more weight, and I lost a lot of hair. I started getting mouth ulcers, more fevers and headaches as well. And at that time, I needed help to be bathed and fed. And not once during that time in particular was I seen as someone in great distress by the medical profession. And it was up to mum and dad to care for me in that way, which makes me quite sad when I look back, because clearly there's something wrong with a young girl experiencing all of those symptoms. And that they weren't treated with more immediacy, makes me quite sad. I did appear for the school photo, which is probably the biggest achievement for year 10. So that's me on the left, and me on the right a few months later, looking a bit pale and a bit sad and sorry for myself, hugging my sweet putty cat there, little Gypsy. But the difference being just that complete drop in energy and fatigue and weight loss, really creating a very sick girl. During this time, we weren't getting any answers and were at a loss as to where to go. And someone recommended to my parents that maybe I was suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome, and that there was a special clinic of GPs practicing and examining this condition. And I was referred to them, who misdiagnosed me with this condition. Due in part to the similar symptoms of extreme fatigue, low energy, and achy muscles and joints. And again, my bloods were still normal, and that's often a cause of frustration for those with CFS, as they are feeling so unwell, but their bloods often appear normal. I was treated with lots of potions, lots of vitamins and minerals, a no wheat, no yeast diet. And to be honest, it all felt quite experimental. They didn't quite understand why my hands were cold and red and swollen and different colours, but still insisted that it was chronic fatigue. And I basically just took these potions, followed this diet, and I was home for the entire school year of year 10. But toward the end of that year, I managed to gain more strength and just keep progressively trying to build my endurance in terms of my muscular strength. I'd go from walking to the front porch to halfway down the front yard to walking to the letterbox, all of those little incremental goals, and also trying to build up my mental strength, as I had lost the capability of really reading for long periods and being able to concentrate and understand what I was able to read. So I didn't do much schoolwork, but amazingly, the school marks I'd achieved before that were enough to get me approval to continue on at years 11 and 12. We were really frustrated by the GP in terms of the fact that there was still other symptoms like my hands that didn't quite add up. We still weren't convinced that this was what I was suffering from, that chronic fatigue just didn't seem like the answer. So we went back to the Royal Children's Hospital and saw another paediatrician. And amazingly, at this time, my bloods were starting to change. So this is about 3 years after those initial lupus symptoms. And for the first time, lupus was being used as a possibility as the cause of these symptoms. And throughout the entire 3 years, lupus was never, ever suggested, and nor was Raynaud's. If anything, doctors were very, very cautious in not wanting to create any false leads as to what was going on, but it was obviously very frustrating to not have an idea. So at least there was an indication that it was looking like lupus, and that hopefully some treatment could happen. And soon after these bloods started showing, so my inflammation markers started to elevate, a confirmation of lupus was made. Particularly a few weeks later, I did appear with a butterfly rash, and that seemed to be a really strong affirmation that this is what was causing my symptoms. And it was very much thought too that if I didn't respond to treatment, then it wouldn't be lupus. But they were very confident that once I had been treated with some prednisolone, that those steroids would ease symptoms and I would improve. And that's exactly what happened. So I was hit really high with a 75 milligram prednisolone dose, and felt like I could rule the world. But the fatigue and lack of energy improved. But I did develop Cushing's syndrome, which creates a swelling in the face, and really difficulty eating and smiling and so forth. And I had lots of infections, like bladder infections and thrush infections, and I'd catch any cold going around at school. And from those pictures earlier that I showed you, this is probably me about 8 months later. So the significant puffiness of the face is very much the steroids doing their work there. In regard to my ability to get back to school, I very much just struggled along in year 11 and 12. I managed to graduate, but because I'd missed so much school, I was very limited with the subjects I could do, and I did the bare minimum where I could not fail a thing in order to graduate. But I gave it a go, and I was able to do it. So that's been a wonderful achievement. And then obviously to go on to university and study my dream job of teaching was another huge achievement, and one that many didn't think I would be able to do. So it was wonderful to just let life open up and see if I could do it. And obviously if I couldn't, that would be something I would deal with. But if I was able to, well, that would be just wonderful. And thankfully that's where my path led. So in terms of the part of the book where I talk about my diagnosis, a lot of what I've just gone through, I discuss, and I also mention too the importance of a support system and the challenges as well, particularly when you're a kid, when you're not at school, during a really difficult time in your development, those teenage years, and the challenges of resuming friendships. So I talk about those, and I also talk about the social and emotional impact of ignorance from my own family. So my own aunt and my grandma refused to visit me when I first became ill, which was devastating, and created a huge family divide where my mum didn't speak to them, nor I, for over 11 years. And I've still never been told why they did not want to visit me. I think fear and ignorance are really powerful emotions, and sometimes things happen in life that really open up and reveal people to be who they really are. So it was a really challenging experience in learning about prejudice and ignorance when you are ill. And I include that because I know there are other sufferers who have experienced something similar. Just briefly, parts 2 and parts 3 of my book, I talk a lot about how to persevere when you're ill. I talk about the relief of being diagnosed with lupus. To be told that none of those symptoms were in my head was such a relief. That, you know, when you're a kid and you're being patted on the head and told that you're not as sick as you think. You know, it mattered so much to me to know that you know, that I was in pain, that it did matter. I also talk about the challenges of being at uni, of life on medicines like steroids, the challenges of being in the workplace and working with people who don't understand, and the challenges of that. And also for me, I talk a lot about being a very shy, very quiet person, and the resistance and anguish I have felt having to find my voice when really I just want to be a person that's under the radar, and finding my way quietly in life, that having this disease was not going to be something I could avoid, and that I would have to find a way to speak up at work and make sure my health needs were met. So I talk a lot about that and how challenging that is when you're a little bit different to other people. And I expand a little bit more on that in part 3, which is about using strength and living with hope and perspective. So I talk a lot about the challenges of teaching, being ill, and balancing lupus flares and the stress of the job. And amazingly, it's more stressful working with the big people than the little people in the teaching world, and so has been the experience for me. So I share how I've managed to get through a few difficult times and what's been best for me in terms of maintaining the best balance for managing my lupus. I talk a little bit about the challenges of being in the sun, of how lupus has affected my relationships with people, and adapting to new challenges that have occurred during the 33 years of having lupus. And I finished my book by trying to share some more positive experiences and wellness activities that I do to try and live a happy and healthy, mindful life. So just finally, in the last few slides, I'll just mention my current challenges and the medicines I take, and also what I do to try and take as best care of myself as I can. I began working in 1998 as a teacher, and I managed to work full-time for the first 9 years, and I really believe that steroids gave me the wings to do that. But after about 9 years, I suffered a really debilitating flare. I'd have little flares along the way, and periods of time off work. I'd have a few weeks off here and there, but then I'd get back to work. But I had a really bad flare that left me unable to work for 18 months. And during this time, after 20 years of having clear urine, I started to have protein and blood appearing. So I've needed to see 2 nephrologists over the time, and just constantly monitoring my urine and making sure that my kidneys are working well. So it was a real humble reminder that this disease can change, that even after 20 years, a new symptom can appear. I returned to teaching for 4.5 days a week after I had 18 months off. And then a few years later, I dropped to 4 days a week. But my health deteriorated around 2013, where I developed fibromyalgia, which meant I had more unexplained increased muscular pain in very random parts of the body that would move. I'd be hours in pain in my shoulders, and then it would move to my legs. It was very, very random, and I was experiencing a lot of insomnia, which I'd never experienced. It was always the complete opposite for me with lupus, in wanting to sleep all the time. So I needed 6 months off work to get that under control, but was only, and when I returned to work, I only came in to teach my senior students, and then I'd go home to bed. And I did that for the rest of that school year, and then came back working the equivalent of 3 days across a week. So over time, I have sadly not being able to work to that capacity I originally did, but I was still able to work, and I had the support of the workplace I was in to allow me to have that time. But sadly, in 2017, I was just having too many lupus flares that I was not recovering from well, and needed to stop teaching. And sadly, I resigned from my job. And teaching at this point is very much unlikely. For the last 5 years of not working, I've needed daily sleeps in the afternoon. So I'd have rests in those early years on steroids, but I never really needed a deep sleep, and I'd sleep well at night. But whereas now I'm needing to sleep for about 2 to 4 hours each day, and battling fibromyalgia has very much been the challenge here. I'm very sun sensitive, and have been since diagnosis, and I've had many flares along the way if I've been out in the sun for 5 or 10 minutes, where I get a migraine-like headache, I'll get fever, fatigue and a rash, and then that can spike other symptoms as well, and I'm in a flare. So I've got to be really, really careful in the sun and under bright lamps as well. And I still have all of those classic symptoms of the flares I would have without treatment. So when I have a flare now, I'll have that deep muscle pain and joint pain. I will want to sleep for days. I won't be able to concentrate. I'll have migraine-like headaches and mouth ulcers, etc. And bed rest is compulsory. I took prednisolone for nearly 15 years, and then needed to stop taking it due to the development of osteopenia in my bones, which is really the beginnings of osteoporosis. So tapering off those took a little while, but I only take steroids now when I'm having a flare. So it's temporary. I've had a few months here and there along the way since coming off them, but it's really just a short burst here and there where possible. And I began taking methotrexate in 2003, and I've been taking it every week for 19 years now, and my body's responded really well in regard to side effects. My liver's been good. That's often a source of concern on these meds. So far so good. And I self-inject that weekly. And the other DMARD that I take, that many of you take as well, is the hydroxychloroquine, please excuse me, or Plaquenil, and I take the maximum of that every day, so two times a day, morning and night, to really reduce the inflammation. It's quite the unsung hero, in that it just chips away at trying to keep that inflammation down. Mobic is another painkiller that's been really helpful, and I've taken a hormone called DHEA that's just helped my energy levels just a little bit. Just in summing up, I try and have a goal. It's really the goal of my osteo, to do at least 30 minutes of exercise a day. I haven't been able to achieve that yet, but it's my goal. I've been doing Drew yoga for 10 years, and it's a beautiful, gentle type of yoga that's been really great in strengthening and reducing stress. So I really recommend a gentle yoga if you're able to do that. I've got a treadmill I can walk on if it's too sunny or rainy, which has been helpful. And I've been working with a dietitian to eat more anti-inflammatory foods, more plant-based foods. I've never been a drinker of alcohol, so that's been helpful as well. And I have a regular sleep in the afternoon, and hopefully the good patterns of sleeping at night help as well. I'm trying to meditate and do relaxation techniques daily. They do help and are really important in just creating less stress in the body. And reducing stress in general and having good people around me has been important, and really trying to look for that silver lining as much as I can, and to do the things I love when I'm well enough to. And obviously that's been very hard in a pandemic, but they're really the most important things that will lift you up in focusing on what you can do. If you are interested in purchasing my book, it's available online on Amazon and Book Depository. And and a myriad of others. So if you just Google my name and lupus equals lift up, persevere, use strength, you'll find my book. And finally, just a reminder, particularly for lupus warriors who are listening today, to be kind to yourself as you battle lupus. Try and keep those kind thoughts coming, because life is incredibly hard as it is, and when you've got a disease as well, you need to be extra kind. So that's very much my story. And yeah, I hope I've covered enough information as possible that will help people to understand my experience.